And we're back in the car on a Thursday, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Thursday morning here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 38 years since the theatrical release of one of my favorite horror films, a guilty pleasure movie, and the single most watched movie, I think, of all the movies. I have seen this film more even than Chariots of Fire. I will admit freely, this is not a great film, but it is compulsively, endlessly, massively rewatchable, particularly the first and second segments, which are sometimes terrifying, other times hysterically funny, intentionally and unintentionally. But it is a hugely entertaining film, available all across streaming, free with Amazon Prime. There's a good print of it on YouTube. It's on Plex. It's on Tubi. It's on Pluto. It's on Philo. It's all over the place. So please don't spend $2, $3, or $4 to rent it, because it is available on like 8 different platforms for free. Released on this day, 1987, from stories by Stephen King, with a screenplay written by the George Romero, the man who created the original Night of the Living Dead, 1968, right? Made in Pittsburgh. They're coming to get you, Barbara. That Night of the Living Dead with Dwayne Jones. And Romero did the remake with Tony Todd before Candyman, kind of taking the Dwayne Jones role. But the movie in question is the Michael Gornick directed 1987 kind of box office dud, which is inexplicably at 29 and 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. These fucking critics. I mean, get the fuck out of here. This movie should be in the 70s. Creepshow 2. Now, the original Creepshow, which was also, not surprisingly, adapted from short stories by Stephen King, was a film that had 5. So in the sort of realm of 80s, what we would call omnibus movies or anthology movies, if you want to use that phrase, because it doesn't really matter what you call it. People like me have different words. As I just said, you could call it omnibus, you could call it anthology, you could just say Tales from the Crypt style. But in the 80s, you had Twilight Zone, the movie, which came out the year after Creepshow, and that is loosely based on the TV series The Twilight Zone. And one of the segments in that film was taken from the famous episode with William Shatner, Terror at 20,000 Feet. But Twilight Zone, the movie, had big hitters: Steven Spielberg, Joe Dante, George Miller, and John Landis, of course, each directing a segment, and it's considered one movie. It's basically 4 short films to make a movie. The first Creepshow film from 1982, the highlight to me is Something to Tide You Over, although a lot of people think that's not the best segment. It's my favorite segment because this sort of cockeyed stunt casting of Ted Danson as a sort of heelish, he's not really even a good guy, and Liam Neeson as a bad guy who's not really even that. I mean, yeah, he's bad, but he has reasons for being bad. That's 5 short films to make this movie. And Stephen King plays in one of the segments, The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. Spoiler alert. Stephen King's such an interesting looking guy. I always felt he could have had a bigger film career if he had chosen to, but Twilight Zone, the movie, 4 short films to make one complete movie. The original Creepshow, 5 short films to make a complete movie. Creepshow 2 is 3 short films to make a complete movie. Now, of the 3 films in Creepshow 2, short films that is, only the second segment, called The Raft, was actually a published short story in one of King's own anthology books, in that case, Skeleton Crew, which is a book that I had read and my father read it. Dad was a big Stephen King guy. He was also a Dean Koontz guy. He loved King's work, but King could be a little bit depressing. Dad liked the fact that Dean Koontz would tell these fantastical stories, but they didn't always have bruising, brutal, vicious endings. Not that many of King's best works end happy. Dean Koontz managed to tell these really dirty, grimy stories, but he figured out, I guess he was more hopeful at that time than maybe Stephen King, but that's neither here nor there. But Skeleton Crew also contains The Mist, which is a great short story that King himself had said he thinks the movie version did it better than he did. And for King to say that, because as much as he's self-deprecating, a lot of laughs on social media, that it's rare for somebody, especially at the esteemed level, to say something like, I didn't figure out an ending and I had an open ending, but man, the filmmakers, and he loved Thomas Jane's performance in that film, Marcia Gay Harden. He has talked about how much he loves that movie. But Creepshow 2 is 3 short stories, so they are longer in length. That's what she said. They're longer in length than certainly the first Creepshow, which has 5. You start doing the math, and these short films, which comprise this movie, they're all between, let's say, 30 and 35 minutes. And generally speaking, you go on the internet, because I feel like this movie is better regarded now by, let's just say, young people watching this film for the first time, because if you go on YouTube, I talk about this a lot. There are so many great movie reactors, really likable, mostly young people, but not always. Sometimes it's a father and a son where the father has seen the film, but most movie reactors checking out Creepshow 2 are surprised that they didn't know more about it, and they think the film is terrific because none of the stories exactly develop the way that you expect them to. And there are some people who either had been big stars previously or would go on to terrific careers that you may be seeing them and wait, isn't that so-and-so from so-and-so? But generally speaking, this sort of film, you arrange the short movies in ascending order of excitement. This is something that Spielberg, speaking of filmmakers that may have ego but not in the wrong kind of way, Spielberg sensed that his segment and John Landis's segments were the weakest of the 4 in Twilight Zone, the movie. So he put, because he ultimately was the guy who was the point man here, and he and Landis, they had a falling out during the making of Twilight Zone because of the tragedy that took place during the Vic Morrow, that whole thing, and the John Landis segment of the first one. But Spielberg still was trying to put out the best product he could, and he arranged the stories in what he thought was worst to best. And so he put Landis's story first. He put his own second. Then he put Joe Dante's with a young Kathleen Quinlan later in Apollo 13, Oscar nomination, terrific. And then what he thought was the best one was George Miller's Terror 20,000 Feet, with John Lithgow kind of taking the William Shatner role from the TV show. In Creepshow 2, the stories are not arranged like that, which would indicate that this film may not have been preview screened. I think that Michael Gornick honestly did not know which of the 3 segments would play best, but clearly the best out of the 3 is The Raft, the middle segment. And most people think that the third and final segment, The Hitchhiker, is the weakest. And it was a little bit dicey that they even named it The Hitchhiker because there was an HBO show already airing that was called The Hitchhiker, but I understand why it was called The Hitchhiker, because that's literally what the story is about. And a very successful genre actor named Tom Wright, who was later in Tales from the Hood. He's fucking great in Tales from the Hood, a bigger role than he has here, but he plays the title character in the third story. Now, I mentioned about some of the actors involved in Creepshow 2. The first segment, which I guess it's the second best out of the, The Raft is the best. Old Cheap Woodenhead, and even I would admit that despite the casting of Lois Childs, who's terrific, she's in the film Moonraker. She's a Bond girl 8 years earlier. Old Cheap Woodenhead is the first segment that we see in the film. And the movie also does something similar, I forgot to mention, like Twilight Zone, the movie, which has the kind of famous bumper opening and closing segments, which don't seem to have anything to do with Twilight Zone, the movie proper. And Dan Aykroyd, do you want to see something really scary? Which is fucking awesome. I mean, Dan Aykroyd really didn't get to play Menace that much, maybe a little bit in My Fellow Americans and a little bit in Grosse Pointe Blank, but more from a darkly comedic angle. But man, Dan Aykroyd really brings it in the segments, the kind of bumper opening and closing segments of Twilight Zone, the movie. But in Creepshow 2, the kind of framing device is very interestingly shot. They blend, and tell me if this sounds familiar, they blend live action footage with animation, and they do it in a way where it almost looks special effecty, but it isn't. It was just very well edited and orchestrated, presumably by the filmmaker, and also the animation team did a really good job here. So you have this kid who is looking forward to getting the new issue of Creepshow. And this sort of running, not gag, but a running storyline, which you see play out in between and then concluding the 3 segments of the movie proper. Very well done. It wasn't something that they had to do, but the fantastic special effects wizard Tom Savini, who was later in From Dusk Till Dawn, he plays the creep. The guy that is, somehow he's a spectral figure, but he seems like he's a living creature, and he interacts with this kid named Billy. It's all really, really cool stuff, and I always love that. Each one of those segments are chock full of great lines of dialogue, and just awesome. So the first one up is Old Chief Woodenhead. And the stars, well, there are 3 stars, basically. The 2 old pros are the great Dorothy Lamour, who made the Road movies with Bob Hope all those years prior, 3 decades prior, Road to Bali, and movies such as that, and George Kennedy, who had been an Oscar winner literally 2 decades earlier with Paul Newman in Cool Hand Luke. And the third person, the third star of this segment is Holt McElhaney. He's another one of those guys, almost a Brian Dennehy of latter days, where every movie fan and a lot of TV fans know the face, but they don't always remember his name. He doesn't look like his name should be Holt McElhaney. But Holt McElhaney plays what amounts to the villain in Old Chief Woodenhead, a young punk, basically, just a terrible kid connected to like an important family in I think it's supposed to be New Mexico, but in this sort of dusty old town that has seen its best day in a world of this film. And the protagonists, the so-called heroes, the George Kennedy character of Ray and the Dorothy Lamour character of Martha, they own a general store, and they've been very good to the town, and the town has been very good to them, but now it seems to be coming to an end. And he has some business with the uncle of the Holt McElhaney character. We don't know that at this particular point in time, but they have continued to support the townspeople, even though many of them can't pay. They're giving them goods and food and presumably produce and canned goods and stuff to try to keep people, you hate to say, from starving, but that's the gist that we're getting, that this kindly old couple has really been helpful to the town. And then Holt McElhaney and a gang of other punks. One terrific young actor who didn't quite have the career of Holt McElhaney, Don Harvey, very, very good in also a villainous role. And Don Harvey has a bigger role the following year in John Sayles' fantastic baseball film. My second favorite baseball film behind The Natural, by the way. I like it more than Field of Dreams even. John Sayles' amazing recreation of the 1919 Black Sox scandal, 8 Men Out. So Holt McElhaney, I did a short last year kind of showing how much range that guy has. And he was the father in The Iron Claw. He plays Fritz von Erich in The Iron Claw. And you look at him all spit and fire and brimstone, and he's just an unlikable asshole. Man, Fritz von Erich, the real guy, wasn't as bad. Ironically, he wasn't as bad as the way he was portrayed in the movie, according to Kevin von Erich, in real life. He loved Holt's performance. We say my dad wasn't that much of an asshole for whatever that's worth. But Holt McElhaney makes a great villain, a scenery-chewing, scene-stealing villain, and both George Kennedy and Dorothy Lamour pretty much have no choice but to let him run away with that segment, and he absolutely does. He is amazing in that, in that short film. But what everyone agrees, almost everyone, is the best of the 3 segments is called The Raft. And not to get, again, I always say not to get political, but in 1987, this is so stupid, there was something that ended up floating in New York Harbor. I'm not sure if it was the Hudson River, but it was just randomly, they decided to call it the garbage barge. I don't know how it got there. I don't know where the garbage came from, but there was this thing floating in the Hudson River in 1987, and it was called the garbage barge. And you watch the movie Creepshow too, because everything is on YouTube now. If you Google garbage barge New York City, and you look at that, and then you watch The Raft, you say to yourself, and this movie was shot before that? Because it kind of seems as if the filmmakers are making a point about ecological disaster and the Exxon Valdez, which was way after this movie. But in King's short story, he doesn't get into any of this because he wrote the story, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s. In fact, he talked about in his nonfiction tome called Dance Macabre, which I absolutely highly recommend. It's a book that he put out in the early 80s, nonfiction, discussing his process, some of his influences, like the famous author Richard Matheson, who I believe, Richard Matheson and Ira Levin were Stephen King's two favorite authors when he was in his kind of formative years. But in that nonfiction book, he talks about how he wrote The Raft as The Float. It was something that evolved, like his first submission is not what ended up being printed in Skeleton Crew. And Skeleton Crew, the version of The Raft that's in there, you can't find any sort of philosophical or political statements. He simply tells a story about three fucking dumb kids who decide randomly to go to the middle of nowhere and swim out into the middle of this, what appears to be a man-made lake, I guess. I'm not even sure in the story if it's a man-made lake. And now that I'm not even sure if it's a man-made lake in the world of I think it is, but I'm not 100% on that. But in the movie, they swim out to this raft in the middle of this fucking an hour away from LA, where presumed it. I think it's supposed to be somewhere in the Carolina mountains, California, could be near Idlewild. I don't know. They don't really explain it. It's not that important. They swim out to this, and there's this oil slick looking thing. Get it? An oil slick. It looks like an oil slick, but it's not an oil slick. At least not any oil slick that, because I don't know of any oil slicks that are carnivorous and are flesh eaters. I mean, we can insert whatever jokes we want there, but in the world of this short film, The Raft, this oil slick somehow has sentient thought and appears to be a very hungry creature. So, you look at M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening and ideas and movies such as Todd Haynes when he did the film Safe with Julianne Moore, where her character slowly gets poisoned by the environment. Like these are all things that are real. These are movies that not necessarily took inspiration, but showing that without really hitting the audience over the head, filmmakers were already making ecological points, and they were trying to discuss things subtly in the 80s. Hey, do you think that Predator is Predator just about a bunch of guys in a forest in the middle of nowhere in Central America being beset upon by an alien? It's a Vietnam War film, Spoiler alert, Predator is really about Vietnam. It just takes the guise of a horror action film. But if you think about Predator, what's it about? It's about a bunch of guys, military people, highly trained people, dropped into a situation they're lied to. Their objectives don't make any sense. They get sent there anyway, and they're hunted down by what? They're hunted down by an unseen enemy. I mean, that's more on the nose, if anything, than Creepshow 2 trying to make a point about being nicer to the environment. But I digress. Although that's not really a digression. That's really what this story is about if you assess it somewhere outside the realm of horror. But the clean, efficient storytelling in this segment in particular, there is not a wasted frame in Creepshow 2. And none of the actors in this particular segment, with the mild exception of Daryl Hannah's younger sister, Paige, who plays the character of Rachel. I'm sorry, she plays the character of Rachel. She's very quiet, and she later was in a film the following year called Shag, which was a kind of 60s period piece. I know a lot of people, it's a little bit of a Gen X, one of our movies. I know a lot of people that absolutely love that film. She didn't really go on to have anywhere near like the career, obviously, of her sister, Daryl Hannah. Not necessarily a great actress, but she was in so many movies that were great. And the original Splash with Tom Hanks, as much as I can't stand the ending, she's terrific in that film. And I love what she does in Kill Bill Part 2. And supposedly she and Uma Thurman didn't get along at all, but man, do they work great together on screen. Just awesome. But The Raft does not waste any time, and there are no shots that are held for even a fraction longer than they should. It is crisp. It is perfectly executed as these four stupid kids. Now, normally there's no crime. Well, there is no crime, but you can do stupid shit. We've all done dumb stuff, and we don't end up getting eaten by an oil slick that somehow has sentient thought and is a carnivore. But in a world of King's story, and in the world of the film, alas, that's exactly what happens. And it is just extraordinary. I've probably seen that segment, 50 times, and the music is terrific. It works perfectly. And it's why, again, the Rotten Tomatoes score just doesn't make any sense. Just on the strength of that segment, this film should be a thumbs up. Because at worst, you have an extraordinary 32 or 33 minute short film here. If that was released by itself, it could have won the fucking short film award. That's how great, to me, this segment is. And the last segment, The Hitchhiker, is pretty weak. Now, as a 13-year-old kid watching it for the first time, the third segment opens with a woman and a man in bed asleep. And we realize that it's a married woman and that this guy is some kind of a male prostitute, or a gigolo would be the word that was used back then. I don't know if they still use that term. But the conversation between the two of them, it wasn't really landing. I didn't understand it. I had to be a little bit older to get it. Okay. So she's actually paying this guy to have sex with her. Okay. Way to go. That guy, thumbs up on that. 2 big thumbs up. But there's not as much of a pull to that particular narrative. And, but I give Lois Childs credit, because a good chunk of this particular short film is her alone in a car, acting against special effects and reacting to what would be special effects done not while she was in the car. And that is very difficult to do. And this is why back in the day, when people would be dragging, for example, Mark Hamill, as Luke in Empire that Strikes Back, for some of the moments where he's not really emoting properly with Yoda. Bro, this guy was on a set with fucking Muppets for 6 weeks. You try doing that. It's not the easiest thing to do, to act as if it's a real creature there when it's a fucking Muppet. So she does a terrific job, but the story it's just not that interesting. And ironically, if they had done this in the manner of what Spielberg did in Twilight Zone, the movie, and there are a lot of people that probably would have just turned the set off after The Hitchhiker, because it's not that good. It's better that they ended the film with the weakest, because The Raft is so good, it will leave you with a better sense that actually, no, this film is terrific, and it's a, top 10 horror film, one of my favorites. But I definitely think, as a whole, I think it's better than the first Creepshow. The first Creepshow, the Jordy Verrill one with Stephen King, is pretty good. It's creepy. The one called The Crate doesn't really make that much sense. It's a little bit like almost inspiring the film with the late Tom Sizemore and Penelope Ann Miller called The Relic from '97, the Peter Hyams film, which is a really good, kind of undersold how solid of a 90s horror film that is. But Creepshow 2 as a whole, there is a certain alchemy, and part of that is, the sequences with the kid Billy, which tie it all together, and Tom Savini's amazing makeup work, and the voice of the Creep, which is, it's really cool. The Creep is like the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt. It's a similar kind of a character, although John Kassir as the Crypt Keeper. What a great voice actor. That guy was awesome. He was a pretty good, he was on a TV show, First and 10, John Kassir. He played the Place Kicker. That was the show on HBO in the 80s with O.J. Simpson. O.J. way before Scandal, where he played a running back named T.D. Parker, who becomes a general manager of a football team. I love that show. I watched it it was so stupid and cheeseball, but super entertaining. Lawrence Taylor made a famous cameo on the show. I think he was on a couple of episodes. LT was pretty funny in his own right. Brian Bosworth was on the show, who, he ended up becoming an actor as well. But Creepshow 2, 38 years old today, not a box office hit, but a film which I believe is way better remembered by history than the reviews at the time, and the kind of lukewarm response from critics and audiences back in the day. Highly recommended. I don't know anybody who has seen it who hasn't come away saying, yeah, that's better than its reputation. That is a really solid horror film, and that middle segment is fucking killer. Literally. Creepshow 2, directed by Michael Gornick, with screenplay written by George Romero from short stories originally written by Stephen King. This has been episode 501 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Thursday morning here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.